You ever walk into a place so perfect, so expensive, it makes you feel like even your shadow should have worn a tux? I'm talking about the kind of place where the doorknobs probably cost more than your first car, where the marble isn't just imported, it's curated. And the silence? Oh, it's not quiet, it's judgmental. Welcome to Unveiled Wealth, where power hides in plain sight and true stories begin when appearances end. In a world obsessed with status, we reveal what happens when the person you dismiss turns out to own everything. Stay sharp. What you're about to see isn't just a story, it's a mirror. So sit back, look closer, and let the truth unfold. The Elysian, Manhattan's most exclusive seven-star boutique hotel, 26 floors of curated elitism and soft classical piano looping faintly in the background like a smug little soundtrack to money. The kind of lobby that smells like white truffle oil and sandalwood, with a hint of old money that doesn't return your calls. And there, right in the middle of that perfume museum of power, stood a man no one saw. His name, Cameron Hale, age 49. Net worth? Enough to buy the building and fire everyone by lunch, twice. But today he wore a weathered barber jacket, desert boots, and no ring on his finger. Just a thin, unreadable smirk under 2 days of stubble. The kind of face you see every day, until you realize it's the one that signs your paycheck. Except no one here recognized him. Not the concierge with the earpiece and inflated sense of self. Not the valet who gave him the once-over like he'd parked wrong on purpose. And definitely not the front desk clerk who hadn't looked up once in the 3.5 minutes he'd been standing there. Now let me tell you something. There's a special kind of violence in being invisible in a world you built. See, this wasn't just any hotel. This was Cameron's flagship, the crown jewel in a portfolio of luxury properties spanning from Paris to Dubai. The Elysian wasn't supposed to just accommodate guests. It was supposed to recode their DNA with sophistication. You'd think the man behind all that would get, I don't know, a nod? Nope. Just air conditioning and indifference. And here's the real kicker. He wasn't here for some secret inspection. He wasn't playing billionaire in disguise for fun. He was here because something smelled off, and it wasn't the scent diffuser pumping out Himalayan fig. He'd been getting complaints. Not Yelp-level whining either. The kind of emails that start with, I'm not usually someone who complains, and end with, but I felt less than human. So he came, alone. No assistant, no security, no damn clipboard. Because if there's one thing Cameron Hale understood better than spreadsheets, it was human behavior when no one's watching. And right now, every second of being ignored was confirming what he suspected. You know, it's always the ones who think you're nobody that show you exactly who they are. You ever notice how the rich don't look around much? Like when they walk into a room, especially a lobby like this, they don't scan. They expect the room to recognize them first, to lean in, adjust itself, roll out an invisible carpet of acknowledgement. But not him. Cameron Hale didn't walk in with expectation. He walked in with curiosity, razor sharp, quiet, and loaded. He'd been standing in front of that Carrara marble check-in counter for exactly 5 minutes and 16 seconds. And yes, he was counting. Not because he was impatient, but because precision reveals patterns. 5 minutes and 16 seconds without a glance. Not a good evening. Not even a flicker of, may I help you? Just the steady thwick of a polished nail tapping a phone screen. The woman behind the counter, early 30s, platinum blonde, name tag said Leighton in delicate script, was the very definition of luxury fatigue. Not tired because she worked hard, tired because she worked around entitlement. Her uniform was crisp, too crisp, honestly, like she didn't move enough in it. The kind of tailored vest that suggested she'd once cared, but the way she leaned on her elbow screamed, don't talk to me unless you're famous. Cameron didn't move, didn't shift, didn't clear his throat yet. He just let the silence stretch. Let it echo against the travertine walls and the ridiculous triple-height glass windows framing a city skyline so perfect it almost looked AI generated. Because that silence, it wasn't awkward. It was data. Now here's something people don't talk about enough. You don't learn who someone is by how they serve important people. You learn by how they treat the ones who don't look the part. Cameron Hale looked like he'd taken the subway. Like maybe he just walked in from a bookstore, not a boardroom. And Leighton, she saw exactly what she wanted to see. A man who didn't belong. "Excuse me," he finally said, voice low, warm, casual, but with just enough resonance to make her look up like he'd popped out of nowhere. Her eyes blinked, slow, disinterested, like her retinas were processing something mildly offensive. "N- Yeah," she replied, flat as old champagne. "Not welcome? Not, how can I assist you today? Just, yeah?" That one syllable carried so much. It said, "You're not worth enthusiasm." It said, "This conversation is already a burden." It said, "You don't matter." He smiled, soft. The kind of smile that says, "I'm collecting receipts." "Yes, I have a reservation," he said, enunciating each word like it was part of a lesson plan. "Cameron Hale." Leighton tilted her head, and maybe it was the lighting, but for a second her expression curled into something between a smirk and a sneer. She turned to her terminal, manicured nails clicking lazily across the screen like they were bored by their own existence. The screen reflected faintly in her glasses. Her lips barely moved. "Nope, nothing under Hale." Cameron didn't flinch. "Are you sure?" She didn't look up. "Pretty sure." "Now, look, I've stayed at enough luxury places to know when someone's being helpful and when someone's being deliberately unhelpful. And this was pure gatekeeping. Soft-spoken, manicured, customer service-proof discrimination. The kind where it's never about race or class directly. No, it's more insidious than that. It's the tone, the dismissiveness, the lack of eye contact, the assumption that you must have made a mistake because clearly you don't belong in this zip code. Cameron inhaled slowly, resisting the urge to raise his eyebrow. "Would you mind checking again?" he said, still calm. She rolled her eyes. Actually rolled them. You could almost hear her neck vertebrae click with disdain. Another lazy tap. Another beat of silence. "Still nothing," she said with the emotional weight of someone reading the weather. He pulled out his phone. Not fast. Not like a man trying to prove anything. Just casual. Deliberate. Took a few seconds to open the email. Held it out. "Confirmation's right here." She glanced barely. Didn't even focus. "Yeah, well," she shrugged. "The system doesn't lie." And then, my favorite part, she added, "Maybe you booked the wrong location. It happens." Oof. See, it's not just that she thought he didn't belong. It's that she assumed he was the mistake. Let me tell you something real. People like her never consider the system could be wrong, because the system was built to protect them. They've never had to consider that sometimes. The problem isn't the guest. It's the gate. Cameron tilted his head, letting the silence do a little work. "You saying I'm lost?" She smirked. That same smug smirk you see on salespeople when they're trying to talk someone into the clearance rack. "I'm saying it's an easy mistake to make." And there it was. Not just dismissal, belittlement. Cameron didn't raise his voice. Didn't argue. Because kings don't shout in their own castles. But oh, he made a mental note. And he smiled. Because this was the moment he stopped being the man with a reservation and started being the man on a mission. There's a moment right before someone fully realizes they're being judged, where the air around them shifts. You don't see it, you feel it, like the space suddenly gets thinner, not colder, just meaner. That's what hit Cameron as Leighton handed back his gaze like it weighed too much to hold. It wasn't a glitch. It wasn't a mistake. It was a decision. And the worst part? It was casual. The Elysian's lobby was designed to intimidate without looking like it tried. Two-story glass walls framed the street like a luxury diorama. Traffic hushed behind soundproof glass. Pedestrians outside moving in slow motion, like extras in a film he wasn't invited to. Above him, a series of recessed amber lights glowed not warm, but expensive, strategically softened to flatter people who already had good skin. The floor, a ridiculous slab of onyx-veined marble polished so obsessively you could probably see your insecurities in it, reflected his silhouette in sharp contrast to the brushed gold concierge station. And yet somehow, standing in all that elegance, Cameron felt less. He could hear the ice cubes clinking lazily in glasses from the bar down the hall. where two men in tailored blazers sat half-turned on stools, laughing in that low, conspiratorial way people do when they think the room belongs to them. Near the elevator, a couple in matching cashmere coats checked their reflection in the chrome paneling like they were auditioning for a silent film. Everyone in the space seemed like they had somewhere to go, someone to meet, and more importantly, permission to be there. Except him. And I get it. There's nothing more invisible than a man who isn't performing luxury. The wrong shoes, the wrong tone, the wrong watchless wrist. And suddenly you're not minimalist. You're suspect. Cameron stood there, letting Leighton's dismissal hang in the air like overpriced perfume. She didn't just overlook him. She deleted him. She didn't double-check the system, didn't call a manager, didn't even ask a follow-up. Just a lazy, half-glanced nope, as if her screen was the only authority in the universe and his name had simply never existed. And that's when it clicked. She hadn't checked the system. She'd used it the way people in power sometimes do. Not to correct, but to erase. To reinforce the story they've already decided is true. That he wasn't worth verifying. He could have argued. Could have made a scene. Could have said, "Do you know who I am?" But see, that's not his style. Real power doesn't declare itself. It collects data. He reached into his jacket, not the outer pocket, the inner one. The pocket no one uses unless they're carrying something important. From it, he pulled a second phone. Unbranded, matte black, government quiet. He unlocked it with a fingerprint, tapped 3 times, and watched the screen light up with back-end access to the Elysian's internal booking system. No suit, no assistant, just credentials. He scrolled, expression unreadable, and there it was. Cameron Hale, penthouse suite. Confirmed. Time-stamped, secure, booked through the corporate portal with triple verification. Then he tapped again, one menu deeper, into the activity log, the digital trail of every hand that had touched that reservation. And there it was. Reservation status. Manually deleted staff. ID L. Thorne. Front desk. His eyes didn't flicker. His breathing didn't shift. But somewhere behind that calm exterior, a fuse had been lit. Leighton. He looked up, finally, and met her eyes with a calm so sharp it cut through her apathy like a straight razor. Her smirk twitched. Just barely. She'd seen something in his expression, or maybe in his stillness. Because here's the thing about people like Leighton. They're experts at ignoring what's beneath them. But the moment they sense they've underestimated upward, they panic. Cameron didn't speak yet. He just turned the phone around slowly, let the glowing screen hover in front of her face like a mirror she wasn't ready to look into. Her eyes scanned, flickered. A beat passed, her pupils contracted. And for the first time all evening, she actually looked afraid. That's the moment I wish you could freeze frame. Because it's not the scream, or the apology, or even the firing that gets you. It's that flicker. That second where someone realizes they haven't just messed up. They've messed up. But Cameron? He didn't gloat. He didn't threaten. He just leaned in, voice lower than before, warmer but with that undertone of, oh, let's call it polite destruction. So Leighton, tell me something. She didn't answer. Didn't breathe either. What happens when you delete a confirmed reservation from the system? Her throat moved. Dry. It just removes it, like permanently. He nodded slowly, like a professor letting a student finish before handing them their grade. And who exactly has the ability to do that? She blinked. Only front desk staff. He raised his eyebrows. Like yourself. Silence, then she tried. I didn't mean... No, he said, cutting her off gently. Don't finish that sentence. You might accidentally tell the truth. The lobby hadn't changed, but suddenly it felt like he had. For a split second, it looked like she might redeem herself. Leighton blinked at the screen like it had just betrayed her personally. Her spine straightened, her shoulders twitched toward professionalism, as if some deeply buried memory of hospitality training had momentarily kicked in. She stammered something close to coherent. I can find you a room. And just like that, the temperature in the room rose half a degree. The tension eased by a notch. It was the kind of moment that makes an outsider think, oh, good, she realized. Crisis averted. False start. Because see, what she did next wasn't redemption. It was damage control with a petty twist. She turned back to the screen, her fingers finally typing with purpose. But the way she tilted her head, the slight flare of her nostrils, Cameron clocked it. He knew that look. That I'm still the one in control energy. The last jab of someone who knows they've lost the fight, but still wants to scratch. She tapped. She searched. She even forced a plastic-sounding "just a moment" through her lips. And then she printed the key card. No smile, no eye contact, no apology. Here you go, sir, she said, sliding it across the counter without touching the marble. He didn't take it. He just looked at it. Which room? She hesitated. That half beat too long. 417. Now here's where things get fun. Room 417 in the Elysian is not a room. It's a message. It's right next to the service elevators, right across from the staff break room, and directly above the waste compactor chute that hums every 45 minutes like a dying jet engine. In a hotel where the penthouse comes with its own sommelier, room 417 is where you send overbooked interns and guests who scream at receptionists for fun. It's a demotion in keycard form. And Cameron? He knew that room. Hell, he had it built. He stared at the card, then at her. Not angry, just curious. Tell me something, Leighton. Do I look like I don't know what you just did? She froze. Her mouth opened. No sound. Just the faint pop of someone realizing they've played themselves on a screen wider than they thought. See, here's what I love about these moments. It's not the confrontation, it's the calm before it. The stillness of a man who's already won and is just waiting for everyone else to realize it. The lobby was starting to notice. A couple near the fireplace shifted awkwardly. One of them leaned forward like he was pretending to adjust his shoelace, but his eyes stayed locked on the scene. A bellhop across the room stopped mid-step, holding a suitcase in one hand and his breath in the other. Even the piano track, looping through invisible speakers in the ceiling, felt like it went down half a decibel. Silence in a luxury lobby is a funny thing. It doesn't feel empty. It feels charged. Cameron finally picked up the key card, not because he accepted the room, but because he was done letting her lead the dance. He gave her a nod, not warm, not cruel, just enough to say, "You don't know it yet, but you're done here." And then he turned and walked away. But let's be clear, this wasn't retreat. This was the beginning of surveillance. Because when someone tries to erase you, you don't yell. You log in. Room 417. It still echoed in his mind like an inside joke he wasn't supposed to hear. But the real punchline? The door opened without resistance. No double chime, no welcome tone. Just the dull click of compliance. The room itself was trying too hard to look expensive. Beige on beige. That design choice that screams luxury to people who've never had it. Cameron stepped in and paused, not because he was impressed, but because the air itself told him something was off. It was clean, sure, but in the way hospitals are clean. Antiseptic, lifeless. The kind of sterile that doesn't say freshly turned over, but rather forgotten for just long enough to need masking spray. Geometry, the carpet had that stiff industrial pile, stiff enough that it resisted his step like it had somewhere better to be. A soft crunch underfoot, like it hadn't been vacuumed properly, but had been spot-checked just in case corporate showed up. To his left, a faux cherry wood desk sat too close to the minibar, a minibar that hummed with the kind of mechanical desperation that only comes from a unit long overdue for replacement. The lamp above it was bent ever so slightly at the neck, like it had been adjusted one too many times by someone trying to ignore the bulb's stutter flicker. The kind of flicker that doesn't ask for attention. It dares you to care. Cameron didn't sit. He scanned. The bedspread, wrinkleless, but too taut. Pillows arranged like someone followed instructions, but didn't believe in the task. The headboard, imitation leather, slightly peeled at the bottom corners. Not visible unless you really looked, but Cameron always looked. On the far wall, a single-frame print of a generic cityscape hung slightly off-level. Not crooked enough to scream, "bad service," but just enough to whisper, "we stopped trying." He reached for the remote. The plastic was warm, not from the sun, but from hands. Recent hands. He turned it over. No batteries. He smiled. Not bitter. Just entertained. You know what gets me? It's not that these places cut corners. It's that they think you won't notice. Because people like you aren't supposed to care. Or worse, you're not supposed to be the one noticing at all. And that's the thing. Most guests wouldn't have. They'd chalk it up to rough day for housekeeping. They'd shrug, adjust the lamp, maybe call down for fresh towels. But Cameron Hale wasn't most guests. And this wasn't about towels. He walked to the desk, pulled out the chair, not gently. It squeaked. Of course it did. Chrome legs over vinyl tile always sing the song of, "We saved money here." He sat, pulled out the same matte black phone from earlier, and placed it beside the hotel's courtesy notepad. The notepad had the Elysian logo, misprinted, just slightly, the gold foil off-center. That's how it starts, you know. One printer setting slips, and no one bothers to realign it, because no one above checks, and the ones below stopped caring. He opened his laptop. No noise, no stickers. Just smooth aluminum and cold purpose. 3 keystrokes, system access unlocked. He went straight into the Elysian's guest services dashboard, an internal portal designed to be invisible to guests and rarely used by anyone above regional manager level. But he had keys to the whole kingdom, not just metaphorically, literally. First, he pulled up reservation logs. The deletion was there, time-stamped, flagged, marked with staff ID, L. Thorne. He'd already known that. But this wasn't about proof anymore. This was about pattern. Next tab, complaint logs. He filtered by location, Elysian Manhattan, then by staff mentions, then by severity. And just like that, the rot rose to the surface. There were dozens. Guests flagged for unexplained reservation errors. Reports of unavailable rooms only applied to certain customers. More than a few mentions of tone, dismissiveness, unexplained denials. And her name, repeated, buried. Logged by the system but never escalated. Cameron leaned back in the creaking chair and let the weight of it settle. Not just the weight of incompetence, but of systemic enablement. That's what most companies don't get. Toxic employees don't survive because they're smart. They survive because someone upstairs is too cowardly to look down. He scrolled further. Found it. Supervisor approvals. None. Manager acknowledgements. Deferred. Internal escalations. 0. General Manager, Trevor Quinn. Trevor. Now that was a name he hadn't heard in a while. One of those handshakes too long, blazer too blue kind of guys. Always knew how to say absolutely without promising a single damn thing. The kind of manager who thought silence fixed problems better than action ever could. Cameron exhaled. It wasn't just latent. This was cultural. A bacteria doesn't grow in sunlight. It thrives in places no one checks. And now, he was checking. By the time Cameron stepped back into the lobby, the space hadn't changed. But he had. And somehow that was enough to shift the entire atmosphere. Same gold-veined marble. Same absurdly curated orchids flanking the entrance. Same concierge still pretending to look busy with a clipboard that hadn't had real writing on it since Tuesday. But now the silence wasn't just ambient. It was anticipatory. Like the air itself had picked up on the fact that someone in the room knew something they shouldn't. The elevator doors slid closed behind him with a sigh. Not a dramatic one, just tired. Like even the machinery was exhausted by the pretense. Cameron stepped forward slowly, heels pressing softly into the thick carpet that felt more like aesthetic than comfort. A bellhop passed him, nodding automatically, then did a double take as if some part of his brain had caught up with the presence his eyes had missed. Leighton was still at the front desk. She hadn't moved, still holding onto her screen like it had become a life raft, still pretending the last 10 minutes hadn't happened. To her left, another staff member, male, mid-20s, slightly too crisp uniform and a name tag that read Asher, was doing that thing young employees do when they sense danger but haven't figured out whose side to stand on yet. His eyes kept darting between Leighton and Cameron like he was trying to track a lightning storm he didn't quite understand. Cameron walked slowly, not to drag the moment, but to let it soak. Let them all marinate in the uncertainty. Because here's the thing. When people think they've gotten away with something, they start relaxing. They breathe easier, shoulders drop, smirks return. That's when they're most vulnerable. That's when truth walks in dressed as routine. He didn't speak, not yet. He just leaned gently on the counter, fingers tapping once, rhythmic, deliberate, on the dark walnut surface that was probably supposed to look artisanal, but smelled faintly like Lysol and lemon pledge. Asher blinked first. Can I help you, sir? Cameron turned, slowly, calmly. The kind of turn that doesn't just demand attention. It redirects gravity. Yes, he said. I'd like to speak to your general manager. Asher swallowed like he'd just been handed a live wire. Of course, Mr. Just tell him someone who cares more about this place than he does is waiting. Asher disappeared like smoke. Cameron didn't look at Leighton. Not out of mercy, out of calculation. She shifted, finally adjusting the keyboard with hands that trembled just enough to betray the internal chaos her face refused to admit. But it was there. The panic, blooming just beneath the surface. The kind of fear that only comes when someone realizes they've made a very public mistake, in front of someone they didn't know had the power to ruin them quietly. He let the silence linger, not to intimidate, to clarify. You know something? There's a kind of justice that doesn't wear a badge or slam a gavel. It just stands there, absolutely still, until the room starts rearranging itself around it. And that's exactly what was happening now. The guests had noticed. Not all of them, but enough. A woman near the espresso bar stole a glance over her sunglasses. A man in a suit paused mid-pour at the complimentary cucumber water stand, suddenly very interested in the reflection on the steel dispenser. It was subtle, but real, because the most powerful moment in any luxury setting is when people start realizing the rules just shifted and they didn't get the memo. Trevor Quinn appeared 3 minutes later, walking fast but trying not to look like it. That stiff, practiced stride of a man who'd built his whole career on staying invisible when things got messy. Good evening, sir, he said, extending a hand before even making eye contact. I'm Trevor, the property manager here. What seems to be the issue? Cameron took a breath. The kind that fills more than lungs. It resets the atmosphere. Trevor, he said, tone even. Let's not pretend you don't already know. Trevor froze. Only for a second, but enough. His smile flickered, just slightly off beat. That millisecond delay that only happens when someone realizes this wasn't the guest service complaint they expected. He cleared his throat. If this is about a reservation error, Cameron tilted his head. Trevor, I've seen the logs. Boom. 3 seconds of perfect stillness followed. No one moved. Not Leighton, not Asher, not even the automatic scent diffuser above the front door. The lobby had entered a new mode, containment, and in that moment, something beautiful happened. The power in the room flipped. For a long second, the lobby didn't move. And I mean that literally. No footsteps, no page flips from the guest brochure stand, no elevator chime. It was that kind of stillness that doesn't belong in a luxury hotel. A stillness so complete it makes the air itself feel dense, like someone had turned the oxygen down a notch. Cameron stood motionless, not frozen, composed. There's a difference. He wasn't shocked by Trevor's admission. He wasn't even impressed. He was simply present. In that terrifying, deliberate way, powerful people occupy a space when they're done being underestimated. Leighton, however, was unraveling. And it didn't happen all at once. That's the thing about guilt. It doesn't crash, it frays. First, her fingers stopped moving. They curled slightly, not into fists, but into that half clench you get when your body's trying to make a decision your brain hasn't caught up to. Her breathing, once shallow and defiant, began to slow, but not evenly, like a skipping record. And then the color in her face, not drained completely, but shifting. That glossy front desk polish giving way to something duller, less curated. Around them, the hotel breathed differently. The once clean smell of citrus oil diffusers now smelled artificial. The light, once warm and flattering, now seemed to expose too much. Even the floor, sleek stone tile with its quiet acoustics, suddenly made every heel click sound like judgment. Time didn't freeze, it flattened, like every second stretched sideways, forcing people to watch longer than they meant to. The woman by the espresso bar turned away, too fast to be casual. A young couple near the elevators looked at each other, silently debating whether they should stay to watch or quietly excuse themselves. Cameron shifted his weight slightly, a small motion, but it echoed. Leighton looked up. Finally, her eyes darted, left, then right. She wasn't looking for help. She was scanning for witnesses, and that's when she tried. "Sir, I didn't mean for it to go that far," she said, voice barely above a whisper. Cameron didn't move, didn't blink, let the silence hold her words like fragile glass. "I just thought maybe that he wasn't a guest, that maybe it was a fake reservation. I didn't mean to." She stopped, because every sentence she added felt more like evidence. Trevor looked at her, not with sympathy, with calculation. You could see the gears turning behind his eyes. If she falls fast enough, maybe I survive. But Cameron? He wasn't watching her fall. He was watching who'd try to catch her. That's the real test of culture. Not who screws up, but who gets shielded after. You want to know the difference between leadership and liability? Look at who panics when truth walks in. And right now, Leighton was panicking. She tried again, this time facing the growing audience that had formed without meaning to. It was a mistake. I didn't think it would matter." There it was. That sentence. I didn't think it would matter. You know, there's something deeply disturbing about how easy that phrase comes out of people's mouths when they assume you don't count. And the silence that followed wasn't quiet. It was witnessing. A moment where every person in the room, consciously or not, understood that someone like her had made a decision about someone like him, and almost got away with it. Cameron finally spoke. Just 2 words. "You're done." Leighton flinched, not like someone being yelled at, but like someone whose world just tilted 2 degrees off axis. Her knees didn't buckle, but her center of gravity betrayed her. The kind of moment where your spine feels too long and your shoes feel too loud. Trevor opened his mouth, probably to say something vaguely managerial. Cameron raised a hand. He didn't even look at him. "No more damage control," he said quietly. "Only cleanup." As he stepped back, guests began to murmur, not in gossip, but in relief. Like someone had finally punctured the false air of perfection that had been pressing against the room like a vacuum seal. And listen, if you're still here, if you've watched this unfold moment by moment, maybe you've felt something shift too. Maybe you've worked somewhere like this. Maybe you've been Leighton. Maybe you've been Cameron. Or maybe you've just stood in a room like this and wondered what would happen if someone finally said what everyone else was too afraid to admit. If this story stirred something, a memory, a fire, or just a quiet yes, then stick with us. Because this is only the beginning. Like, subscribe, stay. Not because we ask you to, because you're the kind of person who doesn't look away. Cameron didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Trevor stood stiffly beside him, trying to reassemble whatever fragments of authority he had left. But every second that passed made it clearer. This place no longer responded to his presence. It responded to Cameron's silence. He turned slowly to the front desk. Not toward Leighton. She was already shrinking behind the terminal. But toward the others. The staff who hadn't spoken. The ones who'd been watching this unfold from behind screens, behind smiles, behind protocol. "Asher," Cameron said calmly. The young man flinched. Not visibly, but something in the way he shifted his feet, the way his hand stopped mid-type, betrayed him. "Yes, sir?" Cameron didn't smile. He simply asked, "How long have you known?" Asher hesitated, the kind of hesitation that doesn't come from confusion, but from moral memory. "A while," he said, barely audible, a beat. "And you stayed silent because—" Asher's face tightened, like someone clenching through dental pain. His eyes dropped, Not out of guilt, but out of self-preservation. Like eye contact might trigger something worse. Because speaking up felt like breaking rank, he whispered. And I needed this job. And there it was. The real rot. Not just abuse. Compliance disguised as survival. Cameron let out a quiet breath. Not judgment, not pity, just understanding. You know something? Systems don't collapse because one person's toxic. They collapse because everyone around them learned to breathe that air and pretend it was oxygen. The printer clicked to life behind the counter, a slow, mechanical sound that seemed louder than it should have in the weighted hush of the lobby. The hotel had resumed its rhythm, but it wasn't the same rhythm anymore. Every sound was now a stutter. Every motion watched. Even the lighting seemed sharper. Not because it changed, but because we did. It's funny how luxury can turn sterile the moment you stop being hypnotized by it. Cameron gestured toward the staff terminals. I want every open reservation audited. Now. Trevor moved quickly. Too quickly. He wasn't walking. He was retreating with intent. You could hear the click of his loafers on the tile, just slightly offbeat, like his balance didn't trust his own weight anymore. The back office door opened and shut behind him, but it wasn't just Trevor who disappeared. 3 other staff members exchanged glances, the kind that last less than a second but say, "We're next." And the truth is, maybe they were. Because when you clean house, the first to worry aren't the worst ones. It's the quiet co-signers, the ones who didn't light the match, but stood next to it with a cup of water and never used it. Cameron took a step behind the counter. He didn't have to ask for access. He simply tapped the screen, entered a code only 2 people in the company knew, and opened the executive ops panel. Full system override. A soft chime echoed from the terminal. The kind of sound that meant one thing. Corporate was watching. Across the room, a cleaning attendant pushing a supply cart paused, half out of curiosity, half out of fear. She didn't know what was happening, but her posture said everything. Shoulders curved inward, head slightly bowed. She was used to disappearing. Cameron looked at her and nodded. Not just acknowledgement, recognition. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is look at the people the system has trained itself to ignore. He tapped again. A full-scale audit protocol launched. Departmental, behavioral, guest service pattern analysis. The hotel, for the first time in its existence, was turning itself inside out. Somewhere in the ceiling, the air conditioning kicked back in, but it didn't cool anything. If anything, it made the sweat sit heavier. And listen, if you've made it this far, if something in you feels what's shifting here, it means you've been in a room like this. You've watched silence get weaponized. You've seen someone laugh too loud to cover what they didn't say, and maybe you've thought, I should have spoken up. This is that moment, the one that teaches you it's not too late. So if this story reminded you of anything real, tap in, like subscribe. Share it with someone who needs to feel seen again. Because people like Cameron aren't rare. They're just usually quiet, until they decide not to be. The elevator doors opened with their usual sigh. But for once, the sound didn't fade into the ambient hum of the hotel. It lingered, just long enough to remind everyone that something had changed. Cameron stepped out, no longer behind the front desk, no longer beside Trevor. He was moving now, not to confront, but to recalibrate. The hotel hadn't gone back to normal. It had entered that strange space between chaos and order, where people speak softer, but hear sharper, where politeness becomes precaution, and every movement feels like it might be evaluated. He passed the lounge. The velvet chairs were still arranged at 45-degree angles, just as the design spec required. The magazines were still fan spread on the glass coffee table, undisturbed, unread, untouched. But the room felt different. Even the chandeliers, those massive custom-blown Czech crystal pieces meant to dazzle, seemed to refract light in a colder tone, like they too were holding their breath. And then he saw her, the cleaning attendant from earlier, still near the service corridor, still pretending to be invisible. Her name tag read Mila. She didn't look up when he approached, not out of fear, out of practice. Because people like her don't get approached. They get avoided, stepped around, ignored like architectural features. Cameron stopped. Not in front of her, beside her. "You've been here how long?" he asked. She blinked, once, then twice. 5 years, she said softly. Her accent clung to every syllable like an apology. He nodded. "And how many times has your opinion been asked?" She looked up now, eyes round, startled, not by the question, but by the idea that someone would think she had one. "Never," she said. "I just clean." You know, there's something brutally honest in those 3 words. I just clean. It's not humility, it's programming. It's what happens when people spend too long being treated like part of the floor plan. Cameron didn't nod in pity. He nodded in recognition. "Today," he said, "that changes." She didn't cry. She didn't gasp. But her shoulders dropped half an inch, the universal measurement for someone just removed a weight you forgot you were carrying. And in that moment, something shifted in the space around them. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just real. Because here's the truth, no one tells you about systems. The rot starts at the top, but the healing, it starts at the edges. With the quiet ones, the steady ones, the ones no one thanked. Cameron kept walking, through the hallway, past the kitchen, past the laundry wing, and everywhere he went, the same thing happened. Someone would pause, look up, expect nothing, then see him looking back. And that simple act of being seen was more disruptive than any policy change. Because when power shifts, it doesn't just fire people, it recenters the entire room. The general manager had made announcements. The system was running diagnostics. The front desk had gone into damage control mode. But Cameron, he was doing something much harder. He was redefining visibility. And listen, if you've ever been in Mila's shoes, if you've ever spoken less to avoid standing out, if you've ever told yourself, "I just clean," when you meant, "No one ever asked what I see every day," then maybe this story isn't just his. Maybe it's yours too. And if it is, then keep walking with us. There's more to say, more people to name, and more rooms to walk into without asking permission. The boardroom sat on the 31st floor, technically labeled as Sky-Level Executive Suite, but everyone in the company just called it what it was, the room. 12 leather chairs, one long obsidian table, a floor-to-ceiling window stretching across the far wall, offering a panoramic view of the city's east skyline. But no one ever looked out, because in here, you looked in. Cameron walked in last. He didn't rush. He didn't clear his throat. He simply entered, and suddenly the conversation that had been humming in low murmurs dropped into vacuum silence. The lights above were recessed, casting sharp downward beams that cut faces in half, one side glowing, one side shadowed. It made everyone in the room look like they had two truths. The table reflected more than just the ceiling. It caught posture, sweat, the curve of a hand clenched slightly too tight. The reflection told you what the person tried to hide above the surface. Cameron didn't sit immediately. He stood at the end of the table, the CEO's chair still unoccupied. Around him, faces, older, seasoned, boardroom veterans who'd survived recessions, lawsuits, hostile takeovers, but rarely had to survive being seen from the inside out. "Mr. Hale," one of them said, nodding. Cameron returned the nod, then sat. And here's the thing. When he sat, no one else adjusted. No papers shuffled, no laptop lids flicked, no glass moved on coaster, because the weight of his presence didn't land on the table. It landed in people's throats. One man coughed, too quickly, covered his mouth as if to claim it was involuntary. Another rubbed the back of his neck. A tic Cameron remembered from the last time that man tried to deflect responsibility 5 years ago. No one spoke first, because no one knew which version of Cameron had entered the room. Was it the detached founder who let systems run themselves? Or the man who just shut down an entire flagship hotel because someone treated the wrong guest like he didn't exist? The silence stretched. It wasn't awkward. It was pressure tested, like the room was waiting to see who'd crack first under its own air. There's something deeply honest about boardrooms, not in what people say, but in how long they pause before speaking, in the way eyes scan the center of the table instead of each other, in how people reach for their water glasses not because they're thirsty, but because they need to touch something that won't judge them. Cameron finally spoke. His voice didn't rise. It flowed, clean even, irreversible. You've all read the report by now. No one answered. A few heads nodded. Others just blinked. He didn't wait for permission. 7 sustained complaints, 5 policy violations swept under internal review, 3 staff flagged multiple times, no action, and a general manager with full knowledge, 0 escalation. He looked down the table, not scanning, holding. Any of you want to explain that? One woman, executive VP of operations, shifted. Her hand reached toward her tablet, then stopped halfway, as if realizing any data she offered would only make things worse. No, Cameron said. Silence again. But this time, it wasn't cold. It was guilt-baked. That unique heat of not being able to tell whether staying quiet helps or damns you more. You could hear the building's HVAC system shift, just a low rumble in the walls. The kind of white noise that only gets noticed when no one dares speak over it. One man finally cleared his throat. We assumed it would be handled at the local level, Cameron smiled, but not kindly. And that's your job as the board? To assume the rot stops itself? The man shrank, not visibly, but internally. You could see it in the way his eyes went just a shade more glassy, his spine losing a centimeter of fight. Cameron turned to another. And you? You pushed the growth-first expansion strategy last quarter. Approved 2 new properties, all while HR reports were being archived instead of addressed. Her jaw tightened. I didn't see that data, she said flatly. You didn't ask. There it was. The cut. And then, he paused. Let the weight drop. You know what's more threatening than a reprimand? A realization. And in that moment, every person in that room realized something simple and terrifying. He was watching now. No more filters, no more friendly firewalls, just eyes and truth. Cameron looked toward the center of the table, the reflection of everyone staring at themselves, whether they liked it or not. This isn't a meeting, he said. This is a mirror. Then he stood, and not one chair creaked. Not because they didn't want to follow, but because no one wanted to move before he did. The boardroom door clicked shut behind Cameron, but the echo stayed. The kind of echo that isn't sound. It's awareness, a shift in gravitational center. And the hallway outside, it felt colder, not because the temperature changed, but because the illusion had. The man who used to walk these floors like a distant myth had just spoken truth in a room full of polished fear. And now everyone else had to recalibrate. As Cameron moved down the hallway, staff members straightened without realizing it. A junior analyst looked up from his phone too quickly, smiled too widely, and nodded in that twitchy way people do when they want to be noticed but not evaluated. 2 assistants from accounting stood near the water station. Mid-conversation, voices lowered just slightly, as if they were discussing something they weren't supposed to be caught having ignored all along. Even the janitor, pushing a fresh cart of supplies, nodded with a slow, deliberate motion. Not out of obligation, but like someone saluting a correction in the system. Trevor emerged from the elevator 20 steps behind. His gait was no longer managerial. It was measured. Shoulders not squared, but rounded. His smile, gone. Replaced by that tight-lipped expression people wear when they realize their power was only ever borrowed. He didn't approach Cameron directly. Instead, he lingered, hovering just outside the radius of confrontation, like a man trying to find the right moment to interrupt a consequence. Cameron didn't stop, but he noticed, and Trevor knew he noticed. The lobby looked the same. Lights still warm, music still playing, front desk still operational, but every detail felt rehearsed, overcorrected, as if the building itself was trying to remember how to act like nothing had happened. One staffer at reception smiled so hard his cheeks twitched. Another dropped a pen and picked it up like it was a ceremonial act of productivity. Leighton was gone. No surprise there, but what was surprising was the woman now standing behind the desk. Mila. Not in a housekeeping uniform, but in a blazer, hair tied back, eyes clearer than anyone else's in the room. She looked up, caught Cameron's gaze, and there wasn't fear there. There was something else. Stillness, like someone who finally had permission to stop whispering. And that, right there, was louder than any PR statement. As Cameron passed by, someone called out softly, "Mr. Hale." A man in mid-level management, name not important, face vaguely familiar, the type who attends every meeting but says nothing unless someone else laughs first. He reached out. Just a little, like a child offering a half-eaten apology. "We didn't know," he said. "No one said anything." Cameron stopped, turned halfway, looked him in the eye. "You didn't need someone to say anything. You needed someone to care." The man nodded, quickly, almost like a reflex. And that was that. Back at the elevator, a small group had formed, people pretending not to hover, not to stare, not to weigh proximity against appearance. But their posture betrayed them, feet angled toward Cameron, eyes that darted and retracted like they weren't sure whether to witness or retreat. Funny how power works. When it's loud, people resist. But when it's quiet, when it walks through the room like gravity, they lean without noticing. Cameron stepped into the elevator, turned, faced forward. And just before the doors closed, he looked up at the security camera mounted in the ceiling. Just for a moment. Not long enough to be threatening. Just long enough to remind whoever was watching that they were, in fact, being watched. The doors slid shut, and for the first time that day, the building blinked. There was no final email, no sweeping gesture, no town hall meeting. Cameron didn't return. He didn't need to. But something about the hotel had shifted, and it stayed that way long after he left. The chandeliers still hung where they always had, scattering soft white light onto polished stone floors. The orchids near the front desk still stood in symmetrical vases. The scent, still somewhere between citrus and something expensive, lingered in the air. From the outside, nothing had changed. But from the inside, everything had. The silence was different now. Not heavy, not strained. Just heard. Staff walked straighter, not with fear, but with awareness. Guests got eye contact faster. Apologies came quicker. Smiles held a second longer. Not because a script said so, but because something inside the room had recalibrated. People now knew someone was watching, not hovering, not punishing, just not looking away. Mila didn't have to campaign for the front desk. She was simply there. The blazer was modest, her stance upright. But the way guests greeted her, like she had always belonged there, was the real promotion. Even the executives started addressing her by name. Not because they'd been told to, but because something about her standing there made the place feel more real. And the guests? They noticed too. Not in a dramatic way. Just small things. Fewer complaints, more thank yous. Longer conversations. A compliment left at checkout. A quiet note written on the receipt. The kind of things that don't show up in KPIs but always show up in memory. Trevor wasn't fired. Not officially. But something in him quieted. He stopped interrupting. Started listening. He moved his office to a smaller room near operations. People said he requested it himself. But it didn't matter. What mattered was that his door stayed open, and his voice stopped trying to close conversations before they started. The board didn't issue an apology, but quarterly review meetings got longer, less performative, more personal. Someone added a section to the internal meeting agenda called "What We're Not Seeing." 40. It started small, an offhand comment here, a hesitant observation there. But soon it became the most important 10 minutes of the call. Layton's name was never mentioned, but her absence was its own kind of resolution. A space she once filled with quiet dismissals now held room for questions, honest ones. Questions like, have we asked the people doing the work what they need? The staff suggestion board moved from the back hallway to the main lounge wall. A minor change, but the next day it had 5 new notes. And for the first time someone replied, not with a brush-off, with a sticky note that said, let's discuss at 10 a.m. That small note got a nickname, the Mila Post-it. Tanya, the housekeeper on floor 5, found a sealed envelope with her name on it. No explanation. Just a bonus check. Just a thank you. Just the kind of thing that makes you wipe your eyes in the staff elevator and pretend it's dust from the vents. Cameron's name never made it into the official narrative, but his silence remained everywhere. In the way the elevator no longer skipped when stopping on staff floors. In the hallway lighting being adjusted so no one's shadow swallowed them whole. In the tone of morning huddles, less directive, more collaborative. Even the maintenance crew got time at the mic. No plaque, no quote, no corporate video. But his legacy lived in the details, the unsexy stuff, the human stuff, the kind of shifts you don't photograph, but still feel when you walk into a room and realize you're being seen. For the first time, the building didn't feel cold, not because of the thermostat, but because people finally stopped pretending the walls were soundproof. Guests began lingering longer in the lobby, not to wait, but to look, to breathe, to feel like part of something that no longer rewarded only silence and speed. One guest even left a handwritten note at checkout. "Thank you. This was the first time I felt like a person in a luxury hotel." No manager signed off on that line, but everyone read it, and some even carried it, not because someone told them to, but because once you've seen a system heal, you can't unsee the scars it once hid. And if you've ever been in a space like this, if you've ever shrunk when someone entered the room, or clutched your name tag like a shield, or smiled out of survival instead of sincerity, then maybe this story wasn't just about Cameron. Maybe it was about what happens when one person refuses to play along, when they step into the silence, not to scream, but to listen loud enough that the system has to answer. So if this story lingered with you, if it felt familiar in a way you didn't expect, or comforting in a way that scared you, then don't just close the tab. Let it sit, and if it moves something in you, even a little, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, share, or don't. Just remember what it felt like for a moment to believe that someone was finally watching the rooms no one else thought to look into. This is Unveiled Wealth, the place where power doesn't yell, it waits. And when it moves, everything moves.